It would be reasonable to assume that the care one provides is the care one would be happy to receive. But this is not what new research reveals. Today on Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond, I am speaking with Sharon Stoliar, a researcher, academic, midwife and mother. Sharon received her Bachelor of Nursing in 2006 and Graduate Diploma in Midwifery in 2008 from UTS. That's the University of Technology in Sydney. She later obtained a Master of Public Health and Master of International Public Health from UNSW, University of New South Wales. Her recently published research around maternity care providers' choices in childbirth sparked some curious public debate around the ethics, equity and the quality of maternity care in Australia. Sharon, hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond program.
Thanks, Annalee. It's lovely to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here today. I absolutely love your topic of research and excited to delve into it a little bit.
Me too.
Amazing. So first of all, I'd love to commend you on this topic of research. It's very rare to see specific research on the choices that healthcare professionals make when it comes to accessing healthcare themselves in their own professional domains. So fantastic to see this. It's quite telling and it raises lots of questions as has unfolded since it came out. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and why you chose this specific field to research in? I know that your experience as a healthcare professional yourself, as a midwife, and your childbirth, your own experience of childbirth was the catalyst for this PhD. Yeah, I would love to hear more about this and how it came about.
Thanks. So I gave birth, I had my son in 2011. I was a midwife already. I think my fourth year of being a midwife, or third year, sorry. And I had actually a really lovely, I had MGP for my pregnancy care. I had a friend who looked after me for that, and she came in for labor as well. Everything was great. I ended up having an emergency, or what we call an emergency cesarean, for failure to progress, or as they call it in the obstetric world. But everything went downhill postnatally. I developed an acute compartment syndrome, which is a very rare complication that does happen, but as I said, very rare. That's where all my trauma happened. It wasn't picked up in time, and I ended up having permanent damage from it. By the time they actually diagnosed it, did the MRI, it was too late to do what they needed to do to prevent permanent damage. There was a lot of, I wasn't listened to with a lot of my complaints of pain. And ultimately, long story short, it ended up really causing a lot of damage to the muscles in my leg, the nerves, my balance. I lost a lot of balance, significant impact physically. I went home after 15 days with a foot drop splint and a walking frame. Felt like 80 years too soon. My husband and I and my new baby had to move into my parents' house, really shook up our lives, ultimately had a big impact on my marriage and ended up being a big contributor towards the end of that. And my career, I wasn't able to stand for very long. And as we know, to work as a midwife or a nurse, you need to be able to be on your feet. And I would fall a lot, 5-6 times a day, because my ankle would roll in, and massive impact on my life. And throughout this journey, I did share a lot on Facebook. Friends and colleagues, I have a big pool of midwife friends and colleagues, and from various hospitals I've worked in as a midwife. And because I think I was open about my journey, I felt a lot of midwives actually reached out to me and shared their story with me, and their story of trauma when they became a mother, their story of falling through the cracks of the maternity care system, having a great antenatal and labor care, but then after the birth, it felt to me that's where it all crumbled for them. Anecdotally speaking, of course, as friends shared their stories, I just felt this is the same as my story. This is very similar. Just being left alone, left to their own devices, and I just felt this tug at my heart. This group of women have not been given a voice, a space to share their story. We have a lot of research out there on the birth experiences of women in general, but hey, what about midwives? We're there at such a sacred time of women's lives, and it can be very triggering if they have had a bad experience, or we don't know, like, how does that experience impact on the care they provide. We like, and the way I was thinking was, we don't send our war veterans back to the place of their trauma, but is there anything at all in place for our midwives, our maternity care providers who provide care for the wider population of birthing women? And it just was really tugging at me, and I just felt this handful of friends and colleagues who shared their story. I just felt this need to give them a space, to give them a voice, for their story to come out, for them to share this part of their life, and whether it be good or bad, and how they're coping with it, how it affects their work, if it affects their work. I just felt there was this need for this research to be out there. So with my experience and with these precious few friends who shared their story with me privately, which I wouldn't have known about because it wasn't on Facebook. They hadn't shared it, but I felt that because I had been open, they felt they could come to me, and I just felt there needs to be a space for them. Even if it's a small handful of these people, these women, they need a space. And that's when I embarked on this journey to start a PhD in this area. And in so many ways, it has been and it continues to be a labor of love. I mean, I'm not doing this to become a university professor or to, to me, anything that comes from it, it doesn't really matter. I just want to give these women a voice and do them justice. So that's been my driving force to continue with this PhD. And anyone who's done a PhD knows how grueling it can be, how difficult it can be, and if you haven't got a why, a passion, a good enough why, it's very easy to let go of that. And I just feel this is a burning passion in me to give them a voice, a space for midwives to be able to share with the world, with their colleagues, on how they need to be cared for when they become birthing women, when they transition into motherhood. And that, I think, from what I'm seeing in my research, it's a different type of care, but it needs to be acknowledged. And that's what I just wanted to get out there into the world.
That was just incredible. Sharon, thank you so much for that backdrop that helped open a little window into the world in which into the world that's inspiring your research. And I absolutely loved all the questions you asked. And I often think about research in this way in our work. We talk to a lot of different researchers, and we often see the gaps in the system. And that's not because the research that is done doesn't hold merit, but we have to ask ourselves who is asking the questions and what are the questions that they're asking. And if your point of view doesn't have a deep understanding of what you're researching, there is a lack there. And I absolutely love the questions that you're asking. These are questions that are not being asked, such as how is the experience of healthcare professionals and midwives working in the system, their own experience of trauma, impact their capacity to deliver care, how it impacts their capacity or their choices that they make. So I'm really excited about these questions, and I love them. I love that someone is asking them, and I love.
I'm excited that you're excited.
Believe me, and well, you don't have to take my word for it, but as we've seen through socials, just how many people have commented on your research since it came out only recently, and the flurry of energy that it's created around this very nuanced topic, of why and how women experience childbirth and the aftercare of that, and their journeys into motherhood. So moving on from that, in Australia, we have an absolutely unacceptable number of women experiencing postnatal depression and anxiety, with 1 in 10 of Australian women having debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder, just like in war. 1 in 10 is a crazy amount. If we were giving a drug to the population and 1 in 10 were experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, I mean, would we not immediately remove that drug from the market? So what's going on for mothers and women that we have this 1 in 10? And then not only that, an astonishing 1 in 3 women experience birth as traumatic. 1 in 3 Australian women experience birth as traumatic. Absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, I think this is really alarming statistic that we really need to shed some light on, because, and if I can just draw your attention to that 1 in 10 statistic, and then the 1 in 3, that is only what is reported, because you have a lot of women who suffer in silence. I mean, the literature, the public health literature really says that this is a silent epidemic. And it's a public health emergency. If we look at endometriosis, I think the rates might be about 1 in 9 women have endometriosis. There's a lot of media attention on it. People know about it, they've heard about it. But when you talk about birth trauma, if 1 in 3 women have birth trauma, why isn't this talked about in society? This needs to become a narrative within society. 1 in 3 is far too many. I mean, any at all is too many. We should not have mothers being traumatized as they transition into motherhood. But 1 in 3, like we need to do something about this, and we really need conversations happening in society. I think it's, if I explain just an example about my husband, yes, I'm remarried to a wonderful man. He has 2 children. And when I met him and started sharing our stories of life, and birth trauma was really nothing that he had heard about before. And he lives in this world. He's an educated, intelligent person. He had no idea what it was. And when I explained it to him and showed him the statistics, his response was, wow, that's really bad. Why doesn't anyone do anything about it? And I think the first thing we need to do is raise some awareness about this. And I think women know about it, midwives know about it, but hang on, the public needs to know about it, because I see that when public knows about an issue, they rally together, but we need more education on it. Society needs to know what birth trauma is, and not just what birth trauma is, not just how many women are suffering from it, but the impact on it, the short-term and the debilitating long-term impacts. It can be really detrimental to the well-being of a mother and her family. And I think we really need to shed light. We need to spell it out for people to know what's going on, exactly how mothers are suffering, how they're being triggered. What does it mean? How does it affect them?
Absolutely. And I think this points to the key aspect around your research, that the questions that you are asking are by no means shallow, and they're by no means relating to the symptoms. They're relating to they draw us into the upstream causes of the experiences of women and mothers. And it's part of the reason why I think this research, which often is now, there's emerging new research coming out from this field of women who have experienced childbirth themselves and are working in the profession, and they're trying to tease out what exactly is going on here in a way that was never prevalent before, was never even available to the researchers, since they themselves have not experienced these experiences. And it's not to say that people can't research topics that they don't experience, but what is the quality of the questions that are being asked by those that they have lived experience? And so it's a completely different ballgame in terms of the ethics and the quality of the research, I think, that we're looking at here. And so I'm also keen, I'm keen to understand, and this is relating to this question, how much our healthcare education systems themselves understand and thus provide accurate healthcare services to women. How much do you think? You've got a background in public health, you have a master's in international public health and also a master's of public health from UNSW. And so this is public health, right? We have 50%, at least half of the world's population are female, are women. Not only that, the overwhelming majority of those women will birth the remaining humans, right? So we're talking about a serious key stakeholder in terms of healthcare and well-being. We're also talking about the impact of the short and the long term for these women who are becoming mothers. And I often equate it to the beginning, to running a marathon, right? Any parent will attest to the fact that when they become a parent, it's a marathon that not that you necessarily choose. You might choose to run the marathon, but I don't think anyone quite realizes what kind of marathon they're going to be running. And you wake up one morning, whether you're prepared or not, whether you wanted to or not, and you're on this intense marathon. And it's a marathon for your whole life. It's not going to stop in the evening when you go to sleep. It's not going to stop in 5 months or 10 years or 30 years. As long as you live and as long as your child is alive, you are a parent to that child. And if you try to stop, or if your leg breaks, or if something goes wrong, the marathon doesn't stop. You just get dragged along with your broken leg or dragged along with your issues until you can get back up on your feet again and get back in shape, right?
Yes,
and so what does it say about us as a society and about our healthcare education systems when we have 1 in 3 women starting a marathon in a traumatic state and with some physical and mental and emotional debilitating aspects, holding a newborn baby in their arms, trying to do this work? What does it say that we don't quite do? These healthcare systems understand what's going on, and are they equipping the healthcare providers, the people that they're teaching, such as yourself and everyone around us, with the correct information to help support this situation? And I'm asking you as a mother and as an academic. Big question.
Very good question and big question. I did my midwifery training in 2008, so it's been a long time. I can't really comment on the content of the midwifery degrees at the moment, but generally speaking, I don't think the healthcare systems, education systems are equipping our midwives and obstetricians with what they need to with understanding of the real problems. And I say that because as a mother, I was reluctant to go and get help in my own journey. I was in denial for 7 years before I decided to go and get psychiatric care. There was, I think, a big problem is that when we discharge women from the hospital system, and I say hospital because the majority of our births in Australia happen in hospital, they're gone. Staff come back to work the next day, forgotten about those women. The women continue to live their lives, and what they experience down the track, like trauma related to that birth experience, doesn't get captured in the hospital medical records. So the hospital doesn't know. When I say hospital, I'm talking about the healthcare staff, the midwives, the doctors. They don't know what that woman's gone through. Whatever happens there, if she goes to therapy, if she goes to get help, there is no connect with those medical records. So there's no way of capturing this problem in a centralized way. So I think there is a real need for education of our staff on the ground who are actually providing everyday care to women as they become mothers, of the impact of the care they provide. I mean, we know that birth trauma is caused by physical injury, but what a lot of people don't realize is the major cause of birth trauma is from the way they were provided maternity care. And that's a big thing. And I don't want to be too controversial here, but we really need to rethink the way we provide maternity care to women and their families. And that's not just a policy change that I'm talking about. That's little things like the way we speak to women, the body language, the eye rolls that sometimes happen, the venting in handover about that woman to your colleagues. Oh my goodness, she's pressed the button so many times this shift. And look, I put my hands up straight away. I'm guilty of doing that too when I was working. But when I went through my experience, which I share about in my book, it really hit home for me that this way of practicing midwifery, whether we realize it or not, impacts these women. And I think the healthcare system, the education system really needs to look at educating our staff about this. I don't know what the solution is, but I think there's so many parts of this question. I think a possible thing is combining some medicine and midwifery subjects where students learn together at universities. I think midwives really need to be equipped with skills to challenge the medical system when they think there is unnecessary intervention. Sometimes obstetricians walk in with suggested interventions which are really unnecessary, and I think it's really important to make a point here that many midwives do want to practice according to their philosophy of midwifery, but they are held back because of the system they work in, policies, time constraints of hospitals, and I think maybe they also don't, generally speaking, don't feel equipped to keep challenging obstetricians, the doctors, to advocate for the women they care for. So I think there's many factors here to answer that question. I didn't personally, when I studied nursing and midwifery, because I have both the qualifications, I didn't see the bigger picture of what I was doing as a midwife, how that was really public health. It was only when I was enrolled in my Master of Public Health and International Public Health where I learned about looking at health in a bigger picture, in the umbrella of health. And when I learned about, okay, the vaccines, for example, we give the vaccines as midwives to mums and babies, but then in my public health training, that's where I learned, hey, the bigger picture, that contributes directly to the health of the nation. And that goes on our WHO statistics. We really are key instrumental as midwives in the health of the nation. And I think there needs to be a bit more connect there. When I looked into the birth trauma after my experience and started reading the literature about it from a public health point of view, it is a massive public health problem. And I think we somehow need to take this narrative out of it being a woman's issue into a public health issue, because I think many people mistakenly think birth trauma is just a woman's issue. But if you, like you mentioned, have 50% of the population as women, that becomes society's issue. That is a public health issue. And if you have 1 in 3 women saying their birth was traumatic, that is a silent epidemic. It's a public health emergency. If this was an infectious disease, we would be classing this a public health emergency. We would put our country on crisis alert. We're in a crisis. And I think because you can't see birth trauma physically, because it's if you can't see a broken arm or a broken leg, we don't think it's there. And again, you've got to look at the resilience of mothers. A lot of mothers, they suffer silently because they're mothers. They think, I got to get on with this. I have a child who needs me. I got to put myself last. We don't value women. We don't value mothers in society. And that's a big problem. And this will continue to be a big problem and go into the next generation if we don't go back to our health systems and at the start in the education system and really put a spotlight on this, because it's all good and well to know how to give needles, how to catch babies, how to do resuscitations. But if the way you're doing it is going to cause trauma for that mother, then it doesn't matter how good your clinical skills are if what you're doing is going to affect someone for life. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm very conscious of not criticizing colleagues and friends here.
I think that this thing in healthcare and just in general in society of this lack of, or that the narrative of well-being and health does not include looking at our shortcomings, at what we're doing wrong. If we cannot do that, we don't have well-being and health. So I think this idea around we cannot look at our issues and we cannot work at them. I mean, this is a problem. I have been as a maternity health consumer for so many years, 8 years now, sitting on boards and committees and meetings and all sorts of meetings across from a national, state and local situations. This is one thing that I see with health that often hinders, really, it's like a key hindrance to their progress and change capacity, is that they're too stuck on enhancing the positives of what they're doing. And when there's a negative, there is, yes, they're looking at their, they have their feedback loops around what's happened and all that kind of stuff. And they create kind of silos in which they try to fix the issue. But because of this weight that they put on looking good, they actually lose a lot of their potential to change, to get better in the areas where they're not. And I think this is something we need to have, a narrative in which we're critically assessing the things that we're doing from that point of view, that we're never perfect and there's always something to learn, especially when we've got statistics like 1 in 3 are trauma and 1 in 10 post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, you can't look at that and say, yeah, we need a bit of change there. No, this is an overhaul, right? So we need to be able to say what's going on the ground without personally pointing out one specific person, because we know it's not an individual thing, it's a cultural thing.
That's right.
And culture changes through lots of different ways, through beliefs and discussions and policies and everything. It's not just one thing. You have to have a multi-pronged approach in order to change culture. So I really commend you on asking the tough questions and pointing out the difficult, sometimes confronting things that need to be looked at, because that is how we're going to make change in the system. Absolutely.
We need to self-reflect. We really need to be critical of our actions. I think a key thing is, as a maternity care provider, is, would I want to be cared for by me? Would I want to be treated by me the way I'm treating this woman and this family? Do I want this care?
Yeah. Well, that brings us, I'm going to skip a question because that brings us straight into, we might try and come back to it a little bit later, but it brings us to finally discussing your research, your fabulous research. And what did your research titled A National Survey of Australian Midwives' Birth Choices and Outcomes actually find?
Well, that paper is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the rest of the survey. So I'm very excited to start sharing the findings from that. In terms of just the statistics, which that paper was, it found that midwives have a lot of agency and autonomy when it comes to their own pregnancy and birth care. They know the system inside out. They know the shortfalls of the system. They know what to avoid and how to avoid it. And they do whatever it takes to protect themselves. So surprisingly or unsurprisingly, midwives have a much higher home birth rate than women in the general population. Midwives have a much higher normal vaginal birth rate, lower cesarean, lower instrumental birth rates. I was and I wasn't surprised with these findings. I think it's very telling in terms of self-advocating, in terms of when you compare the general population of women to midwives who are in the know, there's a big lacking. There is something lacking there for women. We really need to do something about opening up more true continuity of midwifery care models for them to access. I think a lot of people don't realize how quickly you need to book into a continuity of midwifery care once you get pregnant, because those models get booked out very quickly. But midwives know. Midwives know their network of midwives. I think for those who wanted to birth at home, there was a quarter of the midwives wanted to birth at home. 11.2% got to birth, and the rest couldn't because of medical reasons or geographic reasons, because it wasn't available for them all. But
and so just quickly, the difference between that and the general population is, so in the general population, there's less than 0.5% of women give birth at home, and that includes those 11% of midwives from your research.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But also, we just have to remember, bear in mind that these aren't direct comparisons, because
of course,
when I did the survey, it was the 447 midwives reported births across a period of time.
Okay, yeah.
However, when I did do some comparisons, which I wrote about, just combining some year groups, midwives still had a better birth outcomes. They still birthed at home more. And a lot of the reasons for wanting to birth at home, as you can see in the paper, is avoiding the negative aspects of birthing in hospital. Interference with labor, unnecessary interventions, the pressures of hospital policies, the time pressures. Oh, you've been in labor you've been here for this many hours, right? Got to give you a Caesar because, this is the policy, even if nothing's going wrong. So,
and you mentioned for your own birth with failure to progress, which is one of my, as a health consumer advocate in the maternity area, this is one of my least favorite statements. So failure to progress implies that the woman's body has failed.
That's right.
But what it is, it's a system failure to meet the needs of that woman.
It's a disgusting term. We really need to drop, because when I read my notes and looking at my medical records from a perspective, bear in mind, I went from being a midwife to a mother. I lost my midwifery identity somewhere in that process. And when I read, I had also used the term failure to progress, because that's just what you do. Yeah. That's how I learned. That's the system, that's the culture. And then reading my notes from my perspective as a mum, as a woman, I read failure to progress, and I was offended. I thought, how offensive. I labored so hard and so long with only one shot of pethidine at the time. And I only had the epidural when, my midwife said I had an anterior lip. That's when the cervix thickens a bit. And I trusted her, and we'd already had that arrangement about if I need an epidural, when to do it. And I just thought, I'm not a failure. I did so well. How dare they write that about me?
Mm.
And that the whole way of thinking, it just puts limits on women, and it makes them feel that they're a failure. So we need to intervene when, you know what, it just needs to go.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of midwives know this, and some of the reasons why they wanted to birth outside was, a lot to do with this, a lot to do with avoiding these hospital pressures, the hospital protocols that are just unrealistic and just outdated, and a lot of the times not based on real evidence.
That's such a powerful thing. So you've received considerable public feedback via social media over this topic and the findings of this one paper. And as you said, it's the tip of the iceberg. And so what the public feedback seems to be quite defining, and there's a lot, but there seems to me, having read quite a bit of the comments and just seeing how people are interacting with one another, that there's a couple of I guess I want to call it a two-pronged thing, because you can't look at it. It's totally related. They're separate camps, but they're from the same tree. They're separate apples on the same tree. Well, that's not a very good analogy, because this is really strong, clear, two defining things coming from a single kind of trunk. And what it seems to be is that there's the majority of people commenting are women, of course, and then there's many midwives and many mothers commenting. Many midwives, actually, which was wonderful to see. So midwives comment because it's their area, their research is being done on their profession. Many of those midwives are mothers themselves. And what we're seeing, or what I was seeing, is that the midwives are having a mixture of responses, but definingly they're not surprised, and they're delighted to see. They're not surprised about the results. They're delighted to see this research. And many of them are saying, me too. I chose that as well. I would never birth in the system, blah, blah, blah. And we'll pepper through later on a little bit some of those comments from people in the edits, but they're quite astonishingly telling about how the system works. It's kind of in live time. You're seeing, you've got your research, but here are the people saying, yeah, this has happened to me as well. And then you've got mothers who are also expressing a couple of different kind of interwoven responses for them. First, they're really excited as well to see, they're doing, wow, this is really cool. Midwives are choosing things that we would like to choose for our own birth. And also, wow, this is interesting, because these are the people who provide healthcare services to us, and look at what they're choosing.
Yes.
And then there's woven into that a lot of frustration as well, and sadness, and sometimes even a bit of anger that I've seen with some of the mothers saying, wait a minute, we're birthing in this system which is not good for us, and yet you're coming to work and providing care to us. It's a combination of, why don't you tell us what's wrong here? It's hard to put the two and two together for just a mother who's not a midwife, who doesn't work in the healthcare profession and doesn't understand the pressures and the situations that occur within that system. To her, it can seem like a really strange thing that the people that are caring for her in this hospital environment actually wouldn't choose that for themselves. Exactly. So there's a mixture of strong feelings in there, and they're valid. And it's really all valid. All the experiences and feelings are valid. And I'm really interested to hear for you, as both a mother and a midwife, what do you make of these responses?
It's I think these are really valid responses from a lot of the mothers who are very likely thinking, well, what about me? What about me? I wanted to have a normal vaginal birth at home. I didn't want this induction. I wanted to be able to push my baby out. I think there's a few things to remember. Midwives, only 25% wanted to birth at home. 75% wanted to birth in hospital. And when you look at the findings, a lot of it wasn't to do with a place of birth. It was to do with the care provider. those who wanted to birth outside of home, outside of hospital, wanted to be able to choose their care provider. They wanted a home birth midwife that they trusted. Those who chose to birth in hospital chose the hospital because of the care provider that they wanted. Friends, colleagues, people that they deeply trusted. And they, most of the time, these midwives worked in the hospital they birthed at. So they had friends who would be guaranteed to be on shift regardless of when they birthed. There'd be someone on each shift that they knew and trusted. So if you look at bring continuity of care, they've already established a trusting relationship with whoever it is that was going to be at the birth. So already jumped one hurdle there, which a lot of women don't get to have. Even if you look at what is offered in MGP, midwifery group practice, it's not always the true continuity of care. Women might see a different midwife in that group each time, and then it's still, you still haven't given that chance to develop a trusting, deeply trusting relationship with that midwife. So women are already disadvantaged there. So something needs to happen within the system where more true continuity of care models are offered, where either 1 or 2 or 3 midwives only, as opposed to 6 or 7. I think it's, you know, as a midwife, it's amazing that, you know, to be able to have that insider knowledge and pull to make things work. You know, for example, say Sally is pregnant and Sally has Kelly, and Kelly might not be rostered on that shift when Sally goes into labor, but she's already made an arrangement with the midwifery manager that when Sally's in labor, Kelly will come in and she'll just automatically be put on shift. So that woman has her friend looking after her and she trusts her. She will advocate for Sally. So it doesn't really matter where she birthed, she had the person, and all comes down to that individual care provider. So, but as a mother, a consumer of maternity care, and on behalf of every other woman, I'm disappointed that this same thing is not offered to all women. I mean, imagine if every single childbirthing woman had access to true continuity of midwifery care models. Like our Caesar rate would be more in line with the WHO recommendations. We would have much less birth trauma. We would have much less, you know, unnecessary interventions and inductions. It's just, I don't know the answer. I don't know. I'm a bit scared to say what I'm really thinking. What I'm trying to say is it shouldn't matter whether a woman births outside or within the hospital system. She should still have access to that type of care that the midwives in my paper had access to. I think we need to also think about the staff shortages. If you look at the analogy of being a parent, if you're stressed and overworked and you have so much to do, it's really hard to stay patient with your little one and not be frustrated, and to think about being empathetic and kind and how every little action impacts them. So if you then look at the hospital system, midwives are severely we're in a big shortage there. They're not funded properly. We don't have proper ratios. Babies aren't counted as part of the ratios. They are overworked. So in a way, you can kind of understand if midwives are rushing and are not able to think about the way their behavior, their actions, their body language is impacting the women, because they're under so much pressure, often not even getting a chance to use the bathroom or have a morning tea break. There is that element too. And I don't know if I don't really know providing care for your colleague, if there is an element of being a little bit more, I'm really scared to say this. Are they kinder to their colleagues? Do they give their friends special treatment? Do they do this without realizing? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Is this something that we, do they advocate more fiercely for when they're looking after their friends against unnecessary interventions or epidurals? You know, the doctor comes in, okay, I'm going off shift soon. Does she want an epidural? That midwife will say, no, don't go in there. You are not to go in there. Are they as fierce about that for every woman? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm just raising some food for thought here, because that midwife providing care for their friend is invested in a friendship outside of that. So again, if that midwife's providing care for a woman she doesn't know, is there the same level of commitment to advocate, to protect, to be reflective of your actions? I don't know. I'm just bringing up some food for thought here. So I can absolutely understand the sadness and the anger coming from non-midwife mothers about feeling disadvantaged and feeling like, what about me? There's a lot there to think about, and it shouldn't be that you have to be a midwife to get the care you want. It shouldn't be like that. All women should get that kind of care that results in better birth outcomes. All women should be able to have care that reflects lower cesarean rates, high normal vaginal birth rates.
Look, these are absolutely, these are such important questions that you're asking. They're critical, they're vital questions. I mean, recently the Mothers and Babies report came out, the 2020 Mothers and Babies report, which is the AIHW's, the group that is in charge, for people that don't know, basically of collecting data in healthcare across Australia, across the country. And each year they put out a Mothers and Baby report that looks at the last 10 years in comparison of how we're going with our birth statistics. In the past, there have been the specific statistics around mothers and babies have been not very meaningful and supportive of what needs to happen to capture the correct, I mean, what needs to happen to change, because they weren't capturing enough nuanced data. They were capturing data which helped healthcare provide certain things to funding to the healthcare services, but not actually the experiences of not meaningful data around the experiences of women. Some yes, but mostly not. And that's been changing over the years, and especially over the last couple of years, they've had a little bit of an overhaul in there, and they're asking more meaningful questions and more accurate questions around what's really going on. But there's still a really long way to go. But just now, the 2020 report came out, and we're already seeing again a further hike in most of the interventions that are occurring to women. More cesarean section, less vaginal birth, less onset of labor. So the most common, we'll put in some statistics later on, but rather than seeing the things that you would like to see that you're talking about, like the reduction in unnecessary interventions and reduction in experiences that can potentially cause harm to women, we're seeing a hike in those numbers. And I would like to venture out and say, not only is it important to have or critical to have an overhaul, it's actually, and as you said, a state of emergency. There's an emergency going on, and I think we're at 37% C-section rate. Like, what does that mean for us when more than a third of babies are born not through the normal physiological process? Sometimes, yes, that's needed. Like you said, the WHO does recommend between 10 and 15%, and probably closer to 15% now that we're having different, situations across the globe with women. But way beyond that, more than double that amount, what does that mean for us? And so as this is happening, we're seeing an elevation. We're seeing at the same time the statistics are getting worse, but at the same time, we're seeing a really strong voice emerging, especially from female researchers, which has been fantastic to see, like Hannah Dahlen, she's on your paper as well. And so many other, Hazel Keedle, I'm loving seeing her research coming out now. And all of these important questions starting to be asked. I'm hoping that we'll see more and more of an expansion of the capability of the system to meet women where they're at. I can really see how this research has the power and potential to change people's minds. And that's what's really needed. We need people to change their mind around what's happening on the ground, because there is this narrative that Australia has one of the best maternity healthcare systems in the world because less women die. But over the last 30 years, we've seen a hike in all the interventions which are supposed to save women's lives and babies' lives. But there's an absolute straight line when it comes to how many women have died. The maternal mortality rate is the same, and isn't it? Pretty much over the last 30 years. But we've had like an absolute crazy increase in terms of how many interventions are being done. So, you know, we've got to ask better questions. So Sharon, as a mother and an academic, you've experienced a traumatic birth with long-lasting impacts. Your book, Scars of Gold, 10 years in the making, is in its final stages before coming to print. Is there a due date?
Yes, anywhere within the next month or two, it should be, I should have a copy in my hands, but we'll be going to a pre-sale within the next 1 or 2 weeks. So Wonderful. People can pre-order their books if they would like.
Yeah, and we can pop a link into there once the link becomes available as well. And so, Sharon, where to from here?
Well, my book really, I've shared a lot of me into that book. I've really opened myself up. I have talked a lot about birth trauma, and my husband and I are planning on setting up a not-for-profit organization with the aims of bringing an end to birth trauma. I know it's a massive goal there, but I believe that we need to get to the core of the cause of birth trauma. I think what we've got out there is a lot of support for women. I know there are some birth trauma organizations out there that look at supporting families after it happens, but I think my focus is going to be at the core. So I want to look at raising awareness of birth trauma, both in Australia and globally within society, but also within the maternity care system, the people that work within it, stakeholders, the people that fund it, the policy makers, people in government who have the power to make the change. I really want to focus on the core of birth trauma. So I'm hoping that from the funds from my book to use it to establish a not-for-profit foundation with my husband. We will work on that, and you know, I want to write more books about giving women voices and letting them share their stories of trauma, because the world really needs to see. So I am focusing at the moment on finishing my PhD. So I really, within the next maybe 2 years, I want to have all my papers out from the national survey I did back in 2019. I really want to do it justice for all the midwives who gave of their time for me to complete my survey. It was bigger than Ben-Hur. So many of these midwives sat down and finished it. It took up to 2 hours for some, and I'm so grateful. So I want to do them justice and have their voices heard, their stories out there, so that they can get better care when they become mothers. Right now, my plans are just to finish that PhD and also at the same time look at starting that not-for-profit organization to end birth trauma. That's where I am looking at going from here. And you know, from my findings of my research, I'm hoping to lobby the government to implement a system for all midwives who return from maternity leave to have some kind of support to be able to bracket their own experience before they go back to look after women in the maternity care setting, because I think that's a big missing link at the moment. I know there are counselling services available for staff in hospitals, but there needs to be something a little bit more dedicated to midwives who return from maternity leave, because I think understanding your own experience and your own biases, your own fears and worries before you go back to looking after women is going to be a big key factor in not passing on your own issues to women. Whether it be good or bad, I think we need to have a system in place for midwives to be able to bracket their experience. So that is something that I will also work on in the near future, hopefully.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love that. I love that idea of having a pause, having a moment to reflect, to integrate, to attend to anything that needs to be attended to, and then to return. Yeah. It's such a missing concept in our very fast-paced world, this slow, not slow, but actually accurate. It's a more accurate way of showing up in our spaces where we show up, having taken a breath, having self-resourced, having reflected, having showing up in this place where we can actually give truly from ourselves rather than from a place of the place that we're all operating from often.
Well, that's the thing, especially when it comes to birth experience. If you think about it, whether your experience was positive or negative when you became a mother, it impacts every aspect of your life. And if a birth experience is so special, so sacred, so central to a woman, a mother's life, how much more so could it impact her work when her work is in the birthing space? We really need to look at that. So that is a big thing that I will be wanting to work on once I get all my findings out from my PhD survey.
Amazing. 7 years almost in the making, this PhD survey.
Well, where are we? 2020. I started in October 2016. So we're getting there. I hope the uni don't press the red eject button anytime soon. I've got another paper coming out any day now, actually, and that's been a really hard paper. It's an integrative review. It's just been accepted for publication, so any day it'll come out.
Is there a name, something we can look out for?
Insider knowledge as a double-edged sword. It's about insider knowledge being a double-edged sword for midwives. So it has taken me this long to get that review done. I think a really interesting paper as well, and I think there'll be a lot of midwives who will be able to resonate with that as well.
Beautiful. Sharon, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Annalee.
My pleasure.
It was lovely to chat to you.
Thank you, and thank you for your work as well.
Oh, thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond with Sharon Stoliar, discussing a national survey of Australian midwives, birth choices and outcomes. This episode was recorded on Bundjalung country. Our team and I would like to extend our deep respects to elders, past, present, and those emerging. The Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond show is a project of PBB Media, a not-for-profit Australian organisation which has been operating for over a decade to support families, clinicians, and the wider community to ensure a smoother and more congruent journey into parenthood. For more information about our program and the work we do in the world, head to pbbmedia.org. To support our work, subscribe and review this podcast like us on socials, and join the conversation. You'll find all the relevant links on our website.